Okay, thank you. Thank you very much to you both, Dr. Horsey and Natalie. Thank you for your statements here today. Just in relation to pre-birth and post-birth systems of transferring parentage rights from the surrogate mother to the intending parents can best balance protecting the rights of the intending parents of the surrogate mother. Does this system, or either system, have particular benefits with regard to protecting the rights of the children born through surrogacy? It's also noted, Natalie, in your statement, it can be difficult to find parents, UK surrogates. There are 4 non-profit matching organisations that have considerably long waiting lists. It's incredibly rare for, it says incredibly rare, but can you elaborate on that? It obviously, when you say it's rare, it means that it does happen, where the surrogate changes her mind. Can you elaborate on that? And just what makes surrogacy ethical? I mean, that is the question really we want to get our heads around here. So what makes it ethical? And the UK law is not perfect, and this is what you say in your statement here. It's not perfect. UK law has evolved to work in practice, mainly through judicial flexibility around criteria, which could have been interpreted restrictively. But this has muddied the rules, with case law significantly varying what the legislation appears to say. There is also significant delay in recognising children's identity, leaving them living with a family which they're not legally a member of up to 1 year following their birth. In considering similar judicial recognition of surrogacies, it would be sensible for the Irish Government to consider a prompt, ideally pre-birth process, and to ensure the criteria are not too restrictive. So I just want to know, what way would you see that working here in Ireland?
Is there anyone in particular, or would you like both?
Well, there's one there for Natalie, and the one in relation to the pre-birth and post-birth system, the transferring of parental rights, is for Dr. Horsey.
Okay, thank you.
Shall I go first?
Perfect, thank you.
I think, there's a few questions in there. I think you asked about shortages of surrogates in the UK and waiting lists at the non-profit organisations. It's one of the big things that does encourage parents from the UK to go overseas, because there is a real lack of certainty about when they might find a match with a surrogate. There is definitely a disparity in the numbers of surrogates and the parents who are looking for them. So that is one of the big drivers for parents going overseas. In terms of your question about surrogates changing their minds, it is incredibly rare. And, bearing in mind, I'm a lawyer who practices in this area. So if people do have those sorts of problems, I'm the first person that they call. But we've only, had a very, very tiny handful of cases where that has happened. I mean, I'm talking about maybe 4 or 5 cases out of thousands of domestic UK surrogacy arrangements over several decades. And the cases where that does happen tend to be situations in which people have rushed into things, not taken their time, very often met on Facebook groups, not gone through kind of the proper process of thinking through all the implications of what they're doing. And then the communication between the parties breaks down during the course of the pregnancy, and that can lead to difficulties. But it is exceptionally rare for that to happen. And when it does, the way that the law works in the UK is that the family court will make a determination about who the child should live with on the basis of what's in their best interests. So every case is fact specific. It's not a question of the surrogate having a right to keep the baby. It will depend on what's best for the child. And with those, I think 4 or 5 cases they've been split fairly evenly in terms of outcome. You had asked, I think, the very important question of what makes surrogacy ethical. In my mind, I think it's very easy to kind of silo different types of surrogacy and say, well, we want it to be domestic, we want it to be altruistic, and say that, all of those arrangements are ethical if they fall in that category. But actually, I don't think it's as simple as that. I mean, I think constantly every day about the ethics of the surrogacy arrangements that we're involved in. And for me, I think it has a number of different components. I think it is about having a strong relationship that's direct between the parents and the surrogate, so that they are kind of going into this with informed consent. They're wanting to help each other. Everybody is doing this as, adults that know what they're doing. I think it's important to look at the role of the third-party intermediaries. Where those intermediaries operate well, they apply screening. They make sure that people are suitable, that they are kind of well-informed, that they have been through psychological assessments, counselling, legal advice, etc. And that can be a very positive influence on making sure that the arrangements are ethical. But less so where there isn't a fair balance of power. In some jurisdictions, we see those third parties have a very controlling influence and keeping the parents and the surrogates at a distance from each other. And I think that's less ethical and more fraught with problems. I think the child's welfare being at the heart of things is obviously key for an ethical surrogacy arrangement. And what does that mean? Well, that means that the child should be recognised in the right family promptly. But it also means that there should be openness and transparency, that information should be kept for the child in the long-term future, so that that child has a positive story and has access to information to answer any questions they may have as they grow older. And then I think your last question was about pre-birth and post-birth orders. We deal with parents from the UK going to all the different surrogacy destinations overseas. And I think having seen all the different models, there are some where there's a court process even before conception, some where there's a court process during the pregnancy, and some where there's no court process and there's recognition from birth, and then post-birth application processes. So we've seen all of them. I think the ones that work the smoothest are those where, particularly in some US states, there are stipulations that say people should have legal advice, counselling, etc., and enter into a written agreement. And then during the pregnancy, there is a judicial process to check that that has been done properly, so that when the child is born, a determination has already been made that all of those kind of safeguards are put in place, and therefore the child belongs in the right family from the moment of birth. Those arrangements seem to work the smoothest and the best. I think the problem with post-birth recognition is that there's an inevitable delay. So children are in limbo and without status, sometimes stateless. And, when you're talking about crossing borders, that can be very significant. And the problem with, recognising things too early is that, sometimes, for example, in South Africa, people go through a court process before they even conceive, but that's very onerous when they don't know if they're even going to be able to conceive a child. So does that answer all the questions that were on your list?
Yes, it does. Can I come back in or not?
Well, I think we'll have to end the second round, but I will allow Dr. Horsey to come in to respond. Thank you.
Hi, so I think you asked me specifically on the pre and post-birth question on what's best and why, and I think I'd agree with Natalie that a pre-birth determination, but not too early, would be in the best interest of the child, and research, I think, bears that out. I think that helps the autonomy of all the parties be recognised. It can deal with the issue of them having received proper informed consent. It can deal with the screenings and all the checks and balances that need to take place prior to the birth of a child. It also means that at birth, as Natalie said, the children are born into the right family, and that has practical implications, such as in hospital, if there is a need for consent to be given for medical treatments, then it's the intended parents, who are usually the ones who are looking after the child, who are able then to give those consents to the hospital for treatment. These kind of things come up in the interviews and survey responses I've been getting time and time again, that people have had those kind of difficulties in the period immediately after birth, and that's one of the things that could definitely be solved. It also means the child isn't born into sort of legal limbo. It has an identity from the point of birth within the right family. And also the surrogates and the intended parents I've spoken to would prefer everything to be done. I mean, of course they would, but would prefer everything to be put in place pre-birth, because at the point of birth you have a newborn baby and you're looking after a child, and you don't want to be filling out forms and worrying about court process. And it does seem that a lot of intended parents worry unjustly, I think, in many cases, but worry about that court process because it's a court process and because there are forms to be filled in and got right and hearings to be had and all that kind of thing. And then you have to bring the surrogate back and, all those kind of things. So these just increases stress at a time when there should be happiness. And I think that comes out of a lot of the interviews I've been doing. So, in a nutshell, I agree with Natalie on all of that.
Okay, thank